clear the garage, please. Car ready to leave.
Hello, welcome back to Technically F1, and today's video is going to be all about what I think is probably the best turbo hybrid F1 car in F1 2020. And get ready for a shock because it is the 2020 Williams FW43. Now this is a car that a lot of people consider to be the worst car in Formula 1 right now, considering it has no points on the board. But really, its only problem is that it is just difficult to drive. And that being said, it actually isn't that hard. In my opinion, it is the best Formula 1 car in 2020 there is. So let's get into it and let's explain why it is so great. Now, in terms of easiest to drive F1 cars, it really depends. I think the easiest to drive F1 car of all time is probably the Red Bull RB6, although it takes the longest to master. Once you figure it out, it is super easy to drive because it just has bucket loads of downforce, more than any other F1 car in F1 history. But you can't really make an argument for that being the best car in the turbo hybrid era because it isn't in the turbo hybrid era. It's in the almighty V8 era, an era where cars were completely different to how they are now, both aerodynamically and design-wise. So it's completely unfair to compare the two eras on the whole. But within the turbo hybrid era, what I believe is the best car is probably the Mercedes W08, their 2017 car. And 2017 was the year in the turbo hybrid era where the most downforce was achievable out of all time. Although the current F1 cars produce more downforce than they did in 2017, that's more of a regulatory accident that allowed them to do that, rather than the cars actually progressing. It's just more of a diffuser height accident. The actual fastest F1 car of the turbo hybrid era was probably the end of season Mercedes W08, which I then mark as probably inevitably the best turbo hybrid F1 car of all time. If its engine was as good as the current one, or you just swapped the current engine into that car, it would be even better. And if you had the current side pod design on that car, it would be unstoppable. But now with the current era, we're in a bit of a dilemma area. The cars right now are faster than they have been before. Obviously, tire-corrected older F1 cars would be considerably faster than the current ones, but not many people have actually ever tire-corrected a groove tire or Bridgestone tire F1 car, so we don't actually have that physical data, although mathematically it is very achievable to get that data. But in this era, you have these cars that are on these very quickly degrading Pirelli tires, very difficult to drive these tires. So it's very hard to judge what is a good F1 car and what is a bad one. However, in this current 2019 through 2021 era, I believe I have discerned the best car. Both its engine and its drivability is unbelievable. It has the Mercedes engine, which is currently the most powerful engine, and its chassis is the shortest of any F1 car we have right now. Now, the fact that Williams' F1 car is the shortest helps it in two areas. One, it's extremely drivable, meaning that going around corners, it's very pointy at the front end, and you don't have to worry about turning in too hard. Whereas the Mercedes, you run wide at most corners, and you're applying a lot of power in certain areas of the course. The Williams, you're easily out of corners, and you don't have to do this really, really wide through all the corners sort of driving technique that we've seen in F1 for the last few years because the Mercedes has been dominating. If the Williams was dominating, which I really wish it was, especially considering how good the car is, it would be really different. You'd have these cars coming out of the corners at different angles than the Mercedes, and angles that are in general a lot more optimum. And although, like in the footage you see here, I could be going faster if I, say, was pushing harder in qualifying format, had less fuel in the car, the fact is, the general package of having this very short chassis is very good, and Red Bull in recent years has caught on. They ditched their 2018 chassis because that chassis was too long, and the designer for Red Bull, Adrian Newey, knew it. That is why he designed the all-new, shorter 2019 chassis. It was just a more effective chassis on the whole, even though it didn't win the championship. Now, inevitably, with a shorter car and a car that weighs less, aka the Williams, you have to put ballast in it to get it up to the weight regulations. But that's a good thing, because if you can place the ballast wherever you want, then you can put it in areas of the car that are excellent aerodynamics-wise. And if it's better in the aerodynamic field, then the car just becomes, again, easier to drive. So you have the weight in areas where you want the weight, whereas the Mercedes, there's weight all over the place. The batteries are one place, the engine's another place. It's just very clunky to drive. It feels as though they haven't thought this out. The Williams, in one way, is very similar to the Red Bull, where the weight is set up almost perfectly in it. It feels more balanced even than the Red Bull because of its shorter chassis. And as some of you may know, I do design Formula 1 cars, and I've recently gone to the shorter chassis as I've realized that you can more accurately place weight, or just really distribute the weight to get a faster lap time, whereas with a longer car, it's a lot harder to get the weight in the right areas, and that is what Mercedes is suffering from at the moment. You know, if they figured that out, their car would be even faster, but I think it could be, I think the sort of long car that Mercedes runs with right now, that sort of car is going to be going extinct by the time they can even figure that out. And I know, I don't doubt the Mercedes engineers, they're brilliant, but they're not that brilliant, and the fact is, it's just easier to make a shorter car. Now, Williams uses the Mercedes engine quite well. It can get up to 325 kilometers an hour on the Bahrain Grand Prix main straight, and it can probably go even faster on long straightaways like the straightaway at the Vietnam Grand Prix. However, we'll never really know that because the Vietnam Grand Prix is off the schedule next year, so we'll never have a test like that. But it makes quite good use of the Mercedes power unit. I think it struggles with front wing drag, that's something I found, as well as curbs. The two main points of struggle for the Williams are going over curbs, which are pretty necessary for fast laps, but in the race, by not going over the curbs very much, it actually conserves its tires very well. I think that is one of the big problems. I think the biggest problem within the curbs, it's not the fact that the suspension can't handle it. The suspension, when made soft enough, is completely fine. I believe there's aerodynamic stalling on the car when it goes over curbs. From the tests that I've done, it seems as though the car loses downforce when going over the curbs. And that is to be expected, but it looks to lose a lot more downforce than other F1 cars. I don't have exact data on that, but from all my tests that I've done within the Williams, that seems to be the problem. That being said, the Williams itself is a car that doesn't need to go over the curbs because, as we mentioned, it has a really, really, really solid implanted front end, front wing, and that sort of thing, and it is fine. It doesn't need to go over the curbs, whereas if the Mercedes had these sorts of tendencies, it would be really slow. Now, commenting on some of the engineering parts of the Williams FW43, their 2020 car, and what I think could be improved in the long term for Williams. As I've said, it is my favorite car to drive out of all the 2020 cars. I still think in the turbo hybrid era, the fastest is the Mercedes, the easiest to drive is the Williams from 2017. A real unsung hero of the 2017, especially with its podium. It's a car that is really a lot faster than people give it credit for. A car that was really bogged down by its drivers, but a very capable car. We need to remember that in 2017, the Williams was driven by Lance Stroll, and that year was one of Lance's worst years, and he was still able to collect a podium in that car. It shows the sort of prowess that car really did have. Now back to the Williams of today. I think its biggest problem is probably its drag. It is very draggy on the straightaways. It leads them to use less downforce to cut down on the drag, and inevitably it's a vicious cycle and then they're slow through the corners. I think if they were less afraid to use a higher downforce, higher drag setup like I do in my races using the car, I think it would be considerably faster. So part of it is the setup. I think the setup is to blame for the car, and just how they set it up at race weekends. But I think another real crucial thing for Williams and what they really need to fix is the curb tendencies. As I mentioned previously, the car is difficult to drive over curbs, and the aerodynamic stalling is unpredictable. But with that said, it gives the car a lot of character, and I think it is, as I've said many, many times before, and I've said this so many times in recent recordings, it is just the most fun car to drive. It's just the most fun, the most easiest. Even though it has these little tendencies, the Mercedes is so much harder to drive, and now I'm going to explain why it is harder to drive. The Mercedes, you have to drive it in a certain way, and when you fight it, like I did when I started driving that car, it was just very slow the way I was driving it. It was not, there was nothing good about there's nothing rewarding about the way you have to drive the Mercedes, and that is too bad. The Williams is rewarding to do a fast lap, and the Mercedes just isn't. You're doing a lap and you're trying to hustle it around a track. It feels like it doesn't want to be there. The Williams feels like it is truly a gem of a car, and that is why I think this is probably the best car of the season. But now I would like just to talk about what sort of features of this car that I actually bring into my own designing of Formula 1 cars. Now, after having driven most of the 2020 Formula 1 cars, except for the Haas, I'm just not interested in driving a car that's that inconsistent. I've actually brought some of the 2020 F1 cars' design features into my own designs. A lot of the side pod design with sort of hugs the engine, I've actually brought into my own designs, which has been a really difficult packaging job, but still it has been, has some gains to it, and it's completely worth it to design a car with those sorts of packaging styling. So that's sort of what I've done with that. But from the Williams directly, I've taken the short wheelbase because it is much easier to drive, it's easier on the tires, and overall, in the course of a lap, it is still faster. And with all those benefits, you just can't ignore it. I've completely ditched to the long wheelbase approach, which I've been using sort of for the last couple of iterations of my Formula 1 car. I call it the Concept Series, which is my Formula 1 cars that I design. But the short wheelbase is just, it's better in every way at this point, so there's no reason to keep something that's that redundant in the Concept Series, which is the fastest, the best of everything I can design. It's the best, sort of what represents the best of everything I can design in terms of Formula 1 car. Give you such a brief view of it, but there's a lot of revolutionary stuff on this car that I can't show you. So this is just sort of your quick view at the Concept 9, my previous car, and I'm in the middle of designing the Concept 10, but I'm not planning to reveal that. Sorry, it's just what you get. It's, I guess the YouTube audience, they're just not good enough YouTube audience, they're not going to get that. But anyways, thank you for watching today's Technically F1 video. If you did enjoy it and this sort of content, please do subscribe. If you didn't, as always, explain why you didn't like it in the comments. This sort of explains why we don't have too many hate comments. And if you do want to be the first hate comment, well, you can just put yourself out there, can't you? You'll just be embarrassed in front of the 26 subscribers we have. Oh my god, what a number, I know, so crazy. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and goodbye.